struggling for words. But their faces of despair said it all.
We're not usually a family of superlatives, but I have to say this morning my vocabulary fails to convey just how shattered we are.
Clearly fragile and visibly upset, Lois and Peter Greste put on a brave front for the sake of their son and vowed to continue the fight for his freedom and for the freedom of speech.
We are absolutely determined and committed to continue this battle until Peter, as well as his colleagues, are all out of prison and free to do and go wherever they decide.
Peter's brothers were in court when the sentence was handed down, their reaction one of pure shock.
It's I don't know how the judge came to that decision.
The 7-year sentence given to Peter Greste in Egypt marks yet another chapter in the ordeal facing his family. Lois and Peter Greste have shown incredible resilience in the 6 months since their son's arrest, but they may now have to find the strength to push ahead with what's likely to be a long and frustrating appeal process. The Grestes say they're satisfied the Australian government did everything it could in the lead up to the sentence, but have slammed the verdict as a blow to the entire nation.
We put it to you that it is also a slap in the face and a kick in the groin to Australia as well as all fair-minded people around the world.
For now, the living nightmare continues for the parents of Peter Greste, but they want the world to know who their son really is.
This man, our son Peter, is an award-winning journalist. He's not a criminal. He's not a criminal.
Elizabeth Tilley, Sky News, Brisbane. Absolutely, Ash. The despair on their faces really said it all this morning. Lois and Peter Greste appeared fragile. At times they were visibly upset and clearly still in shock over this verdict. They say they're now exploring all options to try and bring their son home, including a presidential pardon and a legal appeal, but haven't made a decision yet as to which action they will take. They're really still trying to comprehend this outcome and decide what they're going to do next. Have a listen to what Peter's mother, Lois, had to say when asked about her son's mental state.
I know Peter is being very, very strong and, this will be a hard time for him, but I know that he'll get through it.
While their primary concern is, of course, with their son, they did make it very clear today that this case should also be of concern to anyone who supports freedom of speech. Take a listen to Peter's father, Eurus.
It is not just affecting the Greste family. We put it to you that it is also a slap in the face and a kick in the groin to Australia as well as all fair-minded people around the world.
Mr Greste said that this verdict came as such a shock to them both because the Egyptian government had given them hope of an acquittal, particularly given the recent conversations that the Egyptian President and Foreign Minister had had with its counterparts here in Australia. So they've really been shattered by this outcome and they really couldn't comprehend any other outcome given the lack of evidence against Peter. Here's Peter Greste.
This man, our son Peter, is an award-winning journalist. He's not a criminal. He's not a criminal.
So, Ash, clearly devastating news for the parents of Peter Greste. They have tried to explain exactly how they're feeling after that verdict being handed down overnight, but really still struggling to come to terms with it and still weighing up what their options are now.
Let's have a look at Sky News reporter Elizabeth Tilley's report. She's been following the trial from Brisbane, where Peter's parents, Lois and Eurus, stayed throughout the 6 months he's been incarcerated.
It was December 29, 2013, just 4 days after Christmas. Peter Greste had only been in Egypt a fortnight when all of a sudden he and his 2 Al Jazeera English colleagues were being interrogated and videotaped in their Marriott hotel room. They'd been covering the aftermath of the removal by the army of Mohamed Morsi from the Egyptian presidency. The trio was arrested and soon found themselves charged with spreading false news and aiding the now blacklisted Muslim Brotherhood. What's happened since can only be described as a living nightmare. The three have endured gruelling jail conditions, shared a tiny 3 by 4 metre cell in Cairo's highest security prison for 23 hours a day, 180 days on, often in 45-degree heat. They've attended 12 court sessions over the course of the trial, forced to watch proceedings from the dock while caged like animals, and repeatedly denied bail despite no concrete evidence being presented against them. Footage allegedly seized and presented in court included several videos with little or no connection to Egyptian politics or Al Jazeera, including a program about horse welfare and a song by Australian singer-songwriter Goitier. Yet the prosecution asked the judge to show no mercy, demanding a maximum penalty of 15 to 25 years behind bars. He settled for 7. The verdict is heartbreaking for Peter's family, who have put their lives on hold for the past 6 months to fight for his freedom. While his brothers have visited him in prison in Egypt, Peter's Brisbane-based parents, Lois and Eurus Greste, have maintained their son's innocence from day one and relentlessly raised awareness of his plight. But this is a case that has been and will continue to be internationally viewed as an injustice to journalists and an affront to free speech. It's a case so highly politicised, it will be seen by many as an attempt to silence opposition voices. And it's the case of an award-winning journalist who has become a symbol for hundreds of his kind, jailed simply for doing his job.
Well, let's talk to someone who knows the Greste family pretty well, and that's our Brisbane reporter, Elizabeth Tilley. She's interviewed them a number of times for us here on Sky News, including here on PVO NewsHour. Elizabeth, let me ask you, I mean, obviously their reaction would be one of devastation. Did you get a sense from talking to them those number of times in the lead-up to where we are now about what they thought about the process if worst came to worst, and exactly what's transpired today happened in terms of their thinking about the appeal process or the possibility of a presidential pardon thereafter?
Not really, to be honest. Peter, they often just said that the outcome such as this they'd found unthinkable. They really did try and maintain as positive an outcome, an attitude as possible. They really did think that there could be no other outcome but an acquittal, because they have from day one maintained Peter's innocence and said that there has simply been no concrete evidence against him or his 2 colleagues. They had mentioned at one stage that if the outcome such as this was inevitable, that they would seek an appeal, and at this stage that is exactly what they are going to do. And they'll be speaking tomorrow to the media. They've chosen today not to speak to anyone because they wanted to wait and see what the verdict would be, but they'll be speaking tomorrow at 10 a.m. and we'll obviously hear more about what their plans are there. But absolutely devastating for them. It will be heartbreaking. I've had a lot to do with them, as you've said, and they're just wonderful people who have really stood by their son from the beginning. They've put their lives on hold for the past 6 months to fight for his freedom, really. His brothers have visited him in prison in Egypt. They've taken turns, Mike and Andrew, but his parents, Lois and Eurus, have been here in Brisbane, and they've constantly thrust Peter's plight into the media to try and raise awareness, not just for his sake, but also for the sake of the other hundreds of journalists that are jailed, and just to highlight the issue and the importance of press freedom, which is really such an important focus, I suppose, in this trial, and it has raised that international awareness, which we have seen. And they've always thanked the public for the support, and they've also always been quite defensive and careful about what they've said about the government's support. I know earlier on in the trial they did say that they had hoped that Tony Abbott could intervene a little bit earlier than he had, but in more recent weeks they've said that they've been very happy with the support they've received from the government, from DFAT. So it will be interesting if they have anything more to say about that tomorrow. Of course, we heard from Julie Bishop saying that they think they've done everything they possibly could have to try and bring Peter home. But yeah, it is going to be taking quite a toll on the family. They've already said just how much of a psychological torture it's been.
Liz, it's staying great here. Give us a sense, when obviously Peter has an international profile, is an international reporter and is known to us through that work, but give us a sense of the family, the type of person that Peter would be and the type of family that they are.
Well, they're just, his parents are just two of the nicest people you've ever met, and his brothers as well. I've spoken to both Andrew and Mike during the times they've come back from Egypt to speak to the media about how Peter's going, and they're just so supportive and just such strong characters. And I can only imagine that is what Peter Greste himself must be like. And they always describe, when asked about how Peter's coping with it, they say, look, he's got a strong character, he'll get through it. And I can imagine that's true. He would have the same sort of spirit that they do in being able to get through these tough times. But I mean, being in a 3x4 metre cell for 23 hours a day with two other people would be torture for anybody, no matter how strong your character is. So that would have to be taking some sort of a toll on him after 6 months, 180 days in that sort of a situation. And the family have admitted that in more recent weeks the stress has started to show. Even though he is receiving those visits and he is being told of the support he's getting, it's just not a situation that he could be in. But I mean, he's 48 years old, but what we've heard from his family is that he was a school captain at school here in Brisbane. He was a high achiever. He'd always wanted to be a journalist, became a fearless foreign correspondent. I mean, he's won many awards for his work. And as they've said, he's always been a balanced reporter and had a record of being as such, which is why they've found it so hard to understand how he could be put in a situation such as this and being accused of airing false news, given his record as a journalist for so many years.
Been through. Elizabeth Tilley, you've met Lois and Eurus Greste. They must be really doing it very tough tonight. I know you wouldn't have been hounding them. They've said they are going to put out a statement tomorrow morning. What can you tell us of them and what they've told you about Peter?
Well, Helen, they've told me that Peter has an extremely strong character and spirit, and that if anyone could withstand the conditions that he has been for the past 6 months, then he's certainly the person to do that. Saying that, they have admitted in recent weeks that he has been feeling the stress, that the situation has been taking a toll, as you can imagine it would be, and that has been, the ripple effect has moved on to the family, and they are really at the peak of anxiety. So tonight's verdict will be absolutely devastating for them, and that goes without saying. But it will be very hard now for them to find the strength to push on with an appeal process. I'm quite certain that is what they're going to do. They have indicated once before that that is an action that they would take if the unthinkable was to happen, such as it has tonight. Whether they consider perhaps asking whether our government will ask the Egyptian president for a pardon instead of going ahead with that appeal process first, I'm not sure. We will find that out tomorrow when we speak to them at 10 a.m. When they hold a news conference to comment on tonight's events. But they themselves are of extremely strong character as well. Lois and Eurus Greste have for the past 6 months put their lives on hold for their son to fight for his freedom. They've been out there every week after the hearings. There's been 12 court hearings all up during this trial of the past 4 months, and they fronted the media every time after them to basically, I guess, make sure that Peter's plight isn't forgotten, and also to really raise the flag and awareness of press freedom across the world and the injustice that many journalists faced for simply doing their job. And they have continued to do that, as have their sons, Mike and Andrew, who have taken turns visiting Peter in his Egyptian jail for the past 6 months as well. So He's holding up okay, but yeah, you've got to wonder how he's going to withstand from here on.
Yes, thank you so much, Liz Tilley in Brisbane. We'll leave it there. And in fact, it's an extraordinary story about those parents, how they have kept the spotlight on their son. I'm going to say thank you now to Stan Grant. Thanks for being with us, Stan, and bringing us those insights. And also to Professor Armin Seipel from the ANU. Thank you so much for your time. Let's have a look at Sky News reporter Elizabeth Tilley's report. She's been following the trial from Brisbane, where Peter's parents, Lois and Eurus, stayed throughout the 6 months he's been incarcerated.
It was December 29, 2013, just 4 days after Christmas. Peter Greste had only been in Egypt a fortnight when all of a sudden he and his 2 Al Jazeera English colleagues were being interrogated and videotaped in their Marriott hotel room. They'd been covering the aftermath of the removal by the army of Mohamed Morsi from the Egyptian presidency. The trio was arrested and soon found themselves charged with spreading false news and aiding the now blacklisted Muslim Brotherhood. What's happened since can only be described as a living nightmare. The three have endured gruelling jail conditions, shared a tiny 3 by 4 metre cell in Cairo's highest security prison for 23 hours a day, 180 days on, often in 45-degree heat. They've attended 12 court sessions over the course of the trial, forced to watch proceedings from the dock while caged like animals, and repeatedly denied bail despite no concrete evidence being presented against them. Footage allegedly seized and presented in court included several videos with little or no connection to Egyptian politics or Al Jazeera, including a program about horse welfare and a song by Australian singer-songwriter Goitier. Yet the prosecution asked the judge to show no mercy, demanding a maximum penalty of 15 to 25 years behind bars. He settled for 7. The verdict is heartbreaking for Peter's family, who have put their lives on hold for the past 6 months to fight for his freedom. While his brothers have visited him in prison in Egypt, Peter's Brisbane-based parents, Lois and Eurus Greste, have maintained their son's innocence from day one and relentlessly raised awareness of his plight. For this is a case that has been and will continue to be internationally viewed as an injustice to journalists and an affront to free speech. It's a case so highly politicised it will be seen by many as an attempt to silence opposition voices. And it's the case of an award-winning journalist who has become a symbol for hundreds of his kind, jailed simply for doing his job. As if it wasn't tough enough, life just got even tougher for Peter Greste. Peering through his caged dock, the 48-year-old journalist could barely contain his frustration as Egyptian prosecutors demanded he be given the maximum punishment for crimes he insists he hasn't committed. If found guilty, that means he could be behind bars for another 15 to 25 years, a prospect his parents are now bracing for.
I think that we've got to be prepared for a possible committal.
Well, a sentence.
A sentence.
Obviously, from our point of view, there cannot and should not be any other outcome but a complete acquittal.
Peter and his 2 Al Jazeera English co-workers have already spent 159 days in Cairo's maximum security prison, sharing a tiny 3 by 4 metre cell that grows hotter by the day. And while Peter appears to be holding up well, the same can't be said for his family.
I have to acknowledge that I'm exhausted. I'm exhausted, and the chances are that I'm more exhausted than Peter's been in the last few months. You know, it is taking a nervous, a stressful toll.
After nearly 4 months and 11 hearings, this trial is entering its final stages. But the outcome for Peter Greste is looking grim. The prosecution summed up its case overnight by urging the court to show no mercy towards the 48-year-old journalist and his 2 Al Jazeera English co-workers. It claims the 3 have committed abominable crimes by spreading false news to harm Egypt's reputation and aiding the blacklisted Muslim Brotherhood. In a statement issued this morning, Foreign Minister Julie Bishop says the Australian government is doing everything it can to help Peter Greste, She says Prime Minister Tony Abbott has raised the case with Egypt's president. She herself has personally rung her Egyptian counterpart, and the Attorney-General has been in touch with Egypt's Minister for Justice. The trial has been adjourned until June the 16th, when the defence lawyers will finish giving their closing statements. Elizabeth Tilley, Sky News, Brisbane. Distorted audio recordings, random video footage and crucial evidence viewed without the presence of defence lawyers. These are just some of the low points of Day 6 of this trial, and as each day unfolds, there's little indication of exactly what evidence the prosecution has that is relevant to the case against Peter Greste and his two Al Jazeera English co-workers.
We can't understand the process, we don't know, and regrettably, as hard as we've tried to come to grips with it, we're now further ahead than we were, nearly 3 months ago.
The hearing overnight lasted almost 7 hours, with the prosecution presenting video, photographic and audio material as evidence to the court. But defence lawyers and journalists claim the footage was almost inaudible and some material completely irrelevant to the case. During a break in the hearing, Peter took the opportunity to speak to journalists, describing the evidence presented as meaningless.
So I can't see that bail will be granted now. We don't know whether this is the end of the prosecution case or not.
Peter Greste has now been in Cairo's maximum security Tora prison for 115 days, sharing a tiny 3 by 4 metre cell with his two Al Jazeera co-workers.
Peter has put himself into a position in his own mind where he's accepted the fact that he can't do anything.
Peter and his co-accused will remain behind bars for another 10 days. But fittingly, when they return to court on May the 3rd, it will be World Press Freedom Day, and the spotlight will be firmly fixed on their plight. Elizabeth Tilley, Sky News. Caged like animals, handcuffed and helpless. These images of Peter Greste and 5 other journalists on trial for terror charges in Egypt have shocked the world. They've also horrified Peter's Brisbane-based parents, who say they're haunted by these latest pictures of their son, which emerged from his second court appearance in Cairo.
It absolutely rocked me to see him in the cage. And as you will know, there's one thing about anticipating all kinds of situations, visualising, a bare cell of a concrete box and so on. We don't know whether he has windows or any other amenity of that kind, and yet when you see an image on the screen and see your own son inside it, it absolutely rocked me.
During a break in proceedings, Peter shouted across the courtroom to reporters, issuing a plea to Prime Minister Tony Abbott to speak out against his detention and the imprisonment of journalists. Mr Abbott's office has responded with a statement saying, "The government strongly supports a free media and is deeply concerned about the charges against Peter and the fact he is subject to criminal proceedings. The government has made a number of representations in support of Mr Greste's release." Determined not to jeopardise their son's situation, Lois and Eurus Greste have accepted the Australian government's stance, but aren't hiding their desire for a more public show of support.
I guess it'd be nice, but I think there's probably an appropriate time for Mr Abbott to speak out.
Peter's brother Andrew, who was also in court for the hearing, has visited Peter 3 times now in the 3 by 3 metre cell he shares with his two Al Jazeera colleagues in Cairo's maximum security Tora prison.
You've got to be hopeful. I mean, every time I come to court, I'm hopeful, but I guess anything's possible, and given I don't understand the system, and I don't think I ever will. I really, I guess always got expectations, but they're they're moderated by the possibility that, you know, this thing sort of continues.
Allegations have also surfaced that other journalists on trial alongside Peter have been tortured and denied medical attention while in prison. But Peter's parents are optimistic. They say their son appeared to be in good spirits when they recently spoke with him on the phone for the first time in more than a month.
I'm sure that Peter will get out eventually. What happens, you know, we believe that there is nothing that they have that he is guilty of.
The 48-year-old reporter was arrested in Cairo along with two of his colleagues on December 29. The men have been accused of broadcasting misleading news about the political situation in Egypt and supporting the blacklisted Muslim Brotherhood. The trial has been adjourned until March the 24th, so Peter will remain behind bars for another 3 weeks. If found guilty, he faces up to 7 years in jail. Elizabeth Tilley, Sky News, Brisbane. Not once in the 7 weeks since their son's arrest have Lois and Juris Greste broken down in public. Until today.
Parenting never ends. Parenting goes to your last breath.
The news of Peter Greste being denied bail and returned to Cairo's maximum security prison for another 2 weeks, too much to bear.
I hope you understand that I was ready to explode. Where is natural justice?
In an extraordinary scene during a break in the hearing, Peter shouted a message across the courtroom for reporters to deliver to his parents. From his caged dock inside the Cairo prison, the 48-year-old told reporters to tell his parents,
I love them. Stay strong. I'm okay. I feel your support.
Peter is one of 20 journalists accused of belonging to or aiding a terrorist organisation and threatening national security. Al Jazeera has continually denied the charges against its journalists, saying that they were only doing their jobs. The Australian government has been reluctant to comment on Peter's situation, something the Grestes are now finding hard to accept.
I don't want to upset our government officials, but we also have to acknowledge that we are a little disappointed, at least a little disappointed, that we don't know, and we haven't heard from Julie Bishop for a while, nor have we heard from Prime Minister Abbott.
The judge adjourned the trial until the 5th of March so that Peter could be provided with a translator and so that the defendants could review the evidence against them. In the meantime, Lois and Juris Greste will have to continue to live with the pain of not knowing when their son may be free again. Elizabeth Tilley, Sky News, Brisbane. These are the photos that keep Lois and Juris Greste from falling apart. Images of their son Peter as a cheeky schoolboy, a loving brother, and a fearless foreign correspondent. Another of their sons, Andrew, flew to Egypt this week to support his brother ahead of the trial and managed to visit him in Cairo's maximum security Tora prison, where Peter has been kept in solitary confinement for 50 days now.
You know, we find it very difficult to understand under our system how somebody who has not been found guilty, that they could put him in solitary confinement and in maximum security. We're hoping, of course, that the best result would be that, you know, it would get dismissed and he would be free. But I think we have to acknowledge that they need to go through their system of judicial system and whatever that means, and we've got to, you know, deal with that and work our hardest to get him released. We understand that the first day will be a procedural day. We know that the following day is Friday prayers, and nothing happens, of course, on Friday prayers. Then on Saturday, I think Morsi is in court. So I guess we won't know exactly when Peter's case will come back on, until, well, it probably will be set on the Thursday, but we won't know until then.
Peter and two of his Al Jazeera colleagues were arrested on December 29 at a hotel in Cairo. International support for Peter's plight has been overwhelming, with US President Barack Obama recently championing his case, but the Australian government has been reluctant to comment on the situation, despite calls for Prime Minister Tony Abbott to be more vocal.
I cannot help but believe that the exposure that this case has had, and I don't mean just Peter personally, but his team, the concern worldwide that has been expressed and quite vociferously stated all around the world, that cannot affect the way people look at this situation and think about it.
Peter Greste will stand trial in an Egyptian court on Thursday, facing the charges of aiding a terrorist organisation and airing false news to harm national security.
Well, the absolute worst case scenario could be that, as we have been informed, the maximum sentence that crimes like the ones that he has been charged with could attract a sentence of 7 years for non-Egyptians and 15 years for Egyptians. It might be a rather strange metaphor to use, but to me it's looking as if a member of the family is in a deep trauma. Place yourself in a position where someone is in a deep coma and you don't know if and when they will wake up and whether they will recover at all afterwards. Now, we certainly hope that a recovery is not far away, that at least he will metaphorically emerge from the coma, but where it takes us beyond that, again, we just have to be patient and hold our breath.
I guess we, you know, you've got to keep going. There's no, yes, you know, breaking down doesn't achieve anything. We do have our moments, of course, but, you know, we keep going. We have our cries and then we get over it and then we go on. And that's the only way to deal with a situation like this, really.